they give a more action-oriented spiritual approach. So therefore, that section is referred to as karma. And the middle 6 chapters are more devotion-centric. And we understood why, from starting from 7th chapter, we understood the knowledge of the absolute truth, how to develop that intellectual conviction about Krishna. In chapter number 8, how to develop the meditative absorption on Krishna. And in 9th and 10th chapters, we saw the very confidential way of approaching Krishna through pure devotional service. And in 11th chapter, we also saw this unmanifested form of Krishna as a universal form. And in this chapter, we are going to substantiate all those teachings. And Krishna is going to present a very, very amazing understanding of all the teachings that he has given us so far regarding the bhakti understanding and more. And he's going to take us even more deeper as to what does it really mean to become a true bhakti yogi, is something that we will realize at the end of this particular chapter. So let's begin with our invocatory prayers. So joining your palms together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So let's begin chapter number 12 with our whiteboard. So interestingly, this is one of the shortest chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, only 20 verses, this and the 15th chapter. And yet these two chapters are one of the most important chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. So let's begin chapter number 12, which is entitled as Bhakti Yoga. Right? So here, Bhakti as in the yoga of devotional service, right? And this chapter again begins on a very, very interesting note. In the previous chapter, Arjuna understood, or he witnessed this universal form of the Lord. He saw that how the Lord is present in this unmanifested form, in his impersonal form, right? So Arjuna begins with a very interesting question. He says, Krishna, I have seen this, I have understood so far, broadly speaking, there are two ways of approaching you. Evam sadata yuktaye bhaktastvam paryupasate. So there is one way of approaching you. So the first 7 verses of this chapter, Arjuna is going to ask Krishna about what is the difference between this impersonal worship, impersonal approach versus the personal approach to Krishna. Right? So he asks this question in text number 1, that there is one way, which is the method of bhakti. So by bhakti here it means the personal way of worship Krishna, of worshipping Krishna, that we saw in chapters number 9 and 10, that Ananya Bhakti, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam, right? So these, always think about me, meditate upon me, offer your respects unto me. So that kind of a direct personal devotional approach. Or ye cha api, or there is aksharam avyaktam tesham. So there is also this unmanifested akshara. Akshara here means, remember in chapter number 8 also, the akshara brahma, that impersonal Brahman aspect. There is this impersonal, unmanifested avyakta, right, approach of Krishna. So if we see broadly, so far in the Bhagavad Gita, we saw mainly there are these 3 kinds of impersonal / unmanifested forms of Krishna. One, we saw this concept of Brahman, right? So what is Brahman? Brahman, if you remember, we described it, it's just a non-material state. It is this impersonal spiritual light. In many world traditions, the absolute truth, God, is defined as that infinite light. So this understanding of Brahman is something similar to that, which is just many times the word Brahman is used in the sense of something which is non-material. It is indescribable. In fact, in the Upanishads, in the Vedas, there is no description given, because all our descriptions may have a worldly frame of reference, and therefore, because you're trying to describe something outer worldly or otherworldly, they do not like to give anything, any description matching this world, and therefore the Brahman is just described as indescribable, right? But basically what they mean is, they're just talking about Brahman here means this impersonal, all-pervading energy. Sometimes God is also referred to as that all-pervading energy. So this is the understanding of Krishna, right? So that is one level. We also saw Krishna manifest himself as as his entire universe. So the universal form, that understanding of the Purusha, that macrocosmic being who is the cause of this whole creation to run, right? That universal form, that we understood. And there was also this Krishna specifically as a time factor, right? If you remember in the previous discussion also, we saw how there are these 2 kinds of universal forms. One is this macrocosmic being, and second was also Krishna, the time factor, which specifically he showed that particular form to Krishna. Time I am, the destroyer of all. When Krishna showed that how all these warriors were entering into his mouth, and they were all being crushed and they were facing their death. So this is also another kind of impersonal or unmanifested form of the Lord. So here we have these 3 forms, and there is the personal form, Krishna as he is, the personal form of Krishna, right? What we saw, a personal form, or from our class on the time dilation, the 9th chapter, we also understood that the deity form of Krishna, which is not different from Krishna. So we understood these categories also. So Arjuna here has understood from this last 6 chapter or last 5 chapters, from chapter number 7 to 11, he understood that Krishna, even to approach you devotionally, we understand devotion, but even to approach you, it seems like there are these 2 forms, right? Somebody may worship you in your unmanifested impersonal form, or somebody may worship you in your more direct personal form. So now tell me, which is better? Who's considered yoga with tama? With tama here means tama means ignorance. With tama means beyond ignorance, or one who's perfect. Who is perfectly approaching you? So one who's a bhakta, or one who's trying to approach your impersonal aspect. So then the Lord replies from text number 2 to 7, very nice elaboration Krishna gives, right? He says, Yeah, he says, Mayavesha mano yomam nitya yukta upasate shraddhaya paryupatas te me yukta tamo mataha. That Mai avesha mano yemam, those who fix their mind upon Mai here means me as in Krishna is referring to his personal form. So one who fixes their mind, fix your mind upon my personal form, right? They are and who are always engaged in worshipping me, nitya yukta upasate, and with what? Parashraddha, shraddhaya paryopetas, one who's worshipping with that kind of a transcendental faith, fixing their mind upon me, worshipping me, and connecting to me with that kind of a superior transcendental faith, they are considered to me yuktama one. They are considered to be the most perfect. So very clearly, Krishna is indicating here that approaching Krishna directly in his personal form, right? So he says these people are most perfect. But does it mean that one who's approaching Krishna in his impersonal form, are they ruined? Will they never reach a destination? No, Krishna also doesn't say that. He says, but then those who worship this unmanifested, who lies beyond the perception of the senses, right? Such a impersonal conception of the absolute truth, one who tries to approach them, at last achieves me. So again, those who are trying to approach Krishna, so the impersonal worshippers, Krishna says, at last they also achieve Krishna. They also achieve Krishna, right? So it is just that they, in the next verse, he says that for such people whose mind is attached to that unmanifested impersonal feature, the advancement is very troublesome. And it is very, and to make progress in that line, in that discipline, is very difficult. Right? So while Krishna is not condemning that kind of an impersonal worship, he is also mentioning that it is very difficult and a very troublesome process. Klesho adhikarastesam. Klesha here means trouble, difficulty. So this kind of an impersonal worship is a very, very difficult process. But on the other hand, those yetu sarvani karmani mayi sannyasa mat para. So one who tries to connect to me, one who's trying to worship me by absorbing in my personal form, by trying to worship me in my personal way without any deviation, right? Meditating upon me, having their minds fixed upon me, he says, Tesham aham samudharta mrityu samsara sagarat bhavami na chirat partha. So here he says, for the impersonal worshippers, it's a very troublesome process. But for the personal worshippers, Krishna says, I am the swift deliverer. I very swiftly deliver them. I am the swift deliverer of such kind of practitioners from this ocean of birth and death. Therefore, indirectly, Krishna is hinting that he encourages his practitioners to connect to his personal form. And that is what this whole Bhakti Yoga is all about. Right? Now, while so important thing for us to understand is, it is not that if you remember, we discussed in 9th chapter also, Krishna is both, when we said Krishna is blank and is not blank, so Krishna is both personal and is not personal, or Krishna is impersonal and also not impersonal. So to deny Krishna's impersonal form is also limiting our understanding of Krishna. That is why the Bhagavad Puran very nicely it explains that the great seers of the absolute truth, those are seeing the truth, those have realized the truth, right? They address that one absolute truth in 3 names as Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti Shabdayate. So Brahman here refers to that all-pervading impersonal feature. Paramatma is that localized feature in the heart, and Bhagavan is that supreme personality, that we are seeing in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna as he is in his personal form, right? So all these three, so to say Krishna is only personal is incorrect. To say God is so great that he cannot be personal, he has to be impersonal, that is also incorrect, right? So Srila Prabhupada would many times give this very beautiful example to resolve this. He says, what is this Brahman that we are talking about? It is nothing but the effulgence of the Lord, the halo around the form of Krishna. That is this impersonal feature, right? So just like how there is sun, and around that sun there is this his effulgence, likewise Krishna also has his effulgence around him, and that his bodily effulgence is his Brahman feature. So you cannot separate these two things, right? So we have to acknowledge both Krishna's personal and impersonal features as well. However, Krishna here is explaining that to understand Krishna as impersonal feature is a very troublesome and a very difficult process, whereas for somebody who is approaching Krishna directly, Krishna is a swift deliverer. Now, then the question that comes, oh, so does it mean so far in the Bhagavad Gita, I have what we discuss in chapter number 9 and chapter number 10, those process of Ananya Bhakti, that the process of exclusive devotion. So which means, are they the only devotees of Krishna? Because clearly here we understood that the bhakti approach is a more favorable approach, and that's what Krishna is recommending. If that is a recommended approach, then does it mean that only 9th chapter is relevant? Rest of the Bhagavad Gita, what we discuss in say 3rd, 4th, 5th chapter, 6th chapters, are they all irrelevant? The process of karma, the process of jnana, the process of dhyana, ashtanga yoga, which we studied again the 8th chapter, are they also irrelevant? Right? So how do we understand? So very beautifully in the next series of verses, Krishna is going to talk about that. I'm going to take a new sheet to explain this. So starting with text number 8, right, through 12, Krishna is going to present a very beautiful spirituality spectrum. Spirituality spectrum, right? Which is a very, very important concept for us to understand if we truly want to internalize the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and start practicing them and appreciate those teachings, right? So what is the spectrum that Krishna talks about? First, he begins in text number 8. He says that Mayeva mana adhishtva mayi buddhim niveshaya, right? He says that always just fix your mind upon me. Fix one's mind upon Krishna, right? And thus engage all your intelligence in me, and thus you will always live in me. Fixing your mind upon Krishna and always living in thoughts of Krishna, right? Always living in Krishna means always living in thoughts of Krishna, right? Such a person, thus you will always live in me without a doubt, right? So this is the stage that we discussed at a stage of exclusive devotion, right? There's a stage of Ananya Bhakti. Ananya, anya means other. So there is nothing other, exclusive devotional service. Ananya Bhakti or exclusive devotion. That's it. That is all that exists in the life of such a person, that they are only thinking of Krishna. Their mind is completely fixed on Krishna. There never is a moment that they are ever separated from Krishna in their thoughts, right? Now, when you and I read such a standard, immediately one may get depressed. Oh no, I am not at that level. I am not always thinking about Krishna. In fact, I have to make an effort to think of Krishna. At this stage, one mind naturally flows towards Krishna, just like how the river flows towards the sea. Despite whatever obstacles that may come, despite whatever rocks may come, whatever forests and trees, and sometimes even human establishments that may come, but when the river needs to reach its destination, the sea, it will just gush past all of those, steer through all the obstacles, and it will reach the sea. Like that. That is the consciousness of such an advanced devotee, right? But if we are not there at that stage, right, so then what? Then Krishna gives the next verse. He says, "Oh Arjuna, if you cannot fix your mind upon me without such deviation, without that kind of exclusive devotion, then follow abhyasa yoga yuktena," means follow the regulative principles of bhakti yoga. So follow bhakti in regulation, or in other words, this is the method of sadhana bhakti. Sadhana bhakti means where one takes up to a devotional practice as their main spiritual practice, sadhana, and following the rules and regulations of devotional principles, right? So for example, some of you may have taken a regulation in your life that every day this much amount of time I'll try to remember Krishna by chanting his holy names, right? I will try to offer my prayers to him. I'll offer certain worship to him, right, in a regulation. Because unlike the person at verse number 8, for such a person many things may come out very spontaneously. Here my motivation is not that kind of a natural spontaneous devotion, but my motivation is more guided by the regulation mentioned in scriptures, right? So these bhakti regulations are again mentioned in the scriptures. So that is also very important principle, right? So it's not that they come up with their own rules and regulations and then start following them. That's not the thing, but rather they follow scriptural injunctions and guided by the motivation given, the regulation given in scriptures. So their motivation is regulation, unlike spontaneous devotion that we see in verse number 8 category, right? So that is the way one needs to follow this bhakti yoga. But some of us may be thinking, oh no, even that may not be possible for me, right? Even to follow strictly these regulations of bhakti also seems little lofty standard for where I am right now, right? So then Krishna says, don't worry, I'll give you one more level, right? If you cannot even practice, this abhyasa, this of regulation, bhakti in regulation, then just work for me. Then just work for Krishna, right? And because by working for me, you will come to that perfected stage, right? So where one is now at this stage where one is working in devotion. Working in devotion, right? If I may, add little qualifiers to it. So at this stage, in the previous stage where one is guided in devotion, right? Such a person, they make the devotional principles or devotional regulations as their guide, and then every step of their life they are constantly guided by those principles of devotion. Whereas the first case, if I may use the expression, they are blinded in devotion. When I use the word blinded, it's not in a negative sense. It's actually in a very exalted sense that all that they see is Krishna everywhere. They are so absorbed in Krishna that they're literally blinded in love for Krishna. right? That is what I use in that context. I'm using the word not in a blinded in a sense of a ritualistic superstitious sense. That's not what I meant. But here blinded means blinded in love for Krishna, right? The second stage where they're guided in devotion, and the third stage they are working in devotion, right? So basically what are they doing? They are working according to their prescribed duties, and they're channelizing their prescribed duties in service of Krishna, like that. Now, if you cannot even do that, again, see, look how broad Krishna's his thinking and his approaches, right? Then he says, however, if you are not even able to work in this consciousness of me, then just try to act giving up all the results of your work and remain self-situated that way. Basically, work, what do you say? He says, at least try to work in such a way that give up the results. Give up results of your work. Right? Meaning, basically now you, instead of working in devotion, at least work in detachment. Or, a better word would be working in that kind of a dispassionate mode. Right? What we discussed this term earlier also, right? So this is the stage, right? This technically it is called as nishkama karma. Right? Kama means desire. Nishkama means without any desire. Basically, working in that kind of a dispassionate mode where I don't want to enjoy. I'm not getting carried away by the prospect of enjoying the result of my work, but in a very equipoised way, I'm working, right? But then, so next verse, Krishna gives one more level after this. And this verse has been a source of multiple interpretations by different acharyas, both within our tradition and also outside our tradition. Even many modern commentators also, they point out that this is one of the very interesting verses. So at least I would like to give an understanding which I got from reading Srila Prabhupada's purport and the way he likes to explain this. So, and this is where the source of confusion is, where Krishna says, Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasat jnana dhyanam vishishyate. If you cannot take to this practice, then engage in cultivation of knowledge. So Krishna says, engage in cultivation of knowledge. So by knowledge here, this is the jnana, right? But better than knowledge, however, is meditation. Jnanat dhyanam vishishyate. So engage in dhyana. So better than knowledge, this is meditation. Right? However, better than meditation is the renunciation of the fruits of action, for by such renunciation one can attain peace of mind. So better than knowledge is meditation. Better than meditation is giving up the fruits of your work, which is what was spoken in the previous verse, right? So now, why is this verse a source of discussion or multiple interpretation? Because if you see from the more classical understanding of the yoga hierarchy or the spiritual hierarchy, karma, action, comes first. Then there is nishkama karma. Sakama karma means working with kind of a fruitive mentality. Then there's nishkama karma, which is working in this dispassion that we are speaking about without being attached to the results of your work. And that, as you're working with that kind of a dispassion, gradually one develops knowledge, and that knowledge leads to meditation, and that meditation leads to devotion. That was the hierarchy we saw in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and eventually the 7th onwards, those chapters, right? So here, Krishna seems to have put this jnana at a very lower stage, and then better than the dhyana, and then he kind of jumbles up the order here, right? So what exactly is how do we understand this? So if you see the journey of any seeker in this field of spirituality, this whole hierarchy Krishna talks about, it makes so much sense, right? So when a beginner begins their spiritual journey, right, we all start as seekers, right? As seekers, basically what are we trying to build, develop? We are trying to develop some kind of a detachment from this world and develop some kind of a higher understanding. And for that higher understanding to come, we are seeking knowledge. We are looking for spiritual books, self-help books, this, basically some source of knowledge, right? So at this stage, this jnana is basically some kind of a higher connect. It need not, it's not that kind of spiritual wisdom, direct spiritual wisdom. It need not, it definitely is not the knowledge of the Lord that we studied in the 7th and 9th chapters, right? This is just general knowledge of the self, understanding yourself, understanding your own body, understanding your own mind, understanding your own emotions, right? Just some knowledge of your own self-awareness, if I may put it that way. Not even self-realization, but just self-awareness. That is a knowledge that is being spoken of, right? And as one starts developing that self-awareness, gradually one wants to put that self-awareness to practice, and one may begin any kind of freestyle meditation, right? Now, usually the word dhyana is a very reserved term used for, what we studied in the 6th chapter, for example, where the yogi, starts to meditate upon the soul and goes beyond the soul to the super soul, etc., right? But here the word dhyana, it could be any kind of a meditation, some kind of a breath meditation, or sometimes just focusing on gazing at a particular point, right? Or even just being very, very mindful in one's own life, right? So if I'll put that word mindful here, right? So if you see from that point of view, right, then there's absolutely no confusion in this hierarchy that Krishna is giving, right? But gradually, as one starts to become more mindful and thoughtful in one's spiritual approach, one develops the right detachment, right? So these two stages are basically at that stage of detachment, right? Again, when we are using the word detachment, understand that detachment is helping one to develop that higher attachment, helping one to develop that higher connect. So it is detachment from matter and attachment to the spirit. That is what this kind of a seeker's jnana and the mindfulness dhyana brings in a person. And gradually from that detachment, one comes to that stage where one starts to develop dispassion. Right? So if you remember, this was exactly the hierarchy that we studied in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita also, where at the level of detachment, one exhibits tolerance. At the level of dispassion, one internally develops, the inner virtue one develops is that of equanimity. And finally, all of these stages, including working in one prescribed duties, they are inspiring one along the path of devotion. So if you see the progression that Krishna is presenting in this chapter, it is very much consistent with the rest of the narrative of the Gita and the rest of the narrative of the Vedas in themselves, where the narrative changes from detachment to dispassion to devotion. Because the level of detachment, you are still you're still tolerating the problem, right? But at the level of dispassion, you kind of become more easy with that situation. You are equanimous with the situation of this world, right? And if you remember, we discussed at the level of devotion, you learn to accept the problems of your life. You accept the situations in your life. Why? Because you see the higher connect to Krishna and the higher guidance of Krishna and higher intervention of Krishna in every walk of your life, right? So this hierarchy actually basically is to show how broad-minded is Krishna in presenting what devotional services is, what bhakti is, right? So if you literally see again what we discussed in the 10th chapter as well, that how every chapter of Gita is talking about bhakti, and if you look at this particular approach that Krishna has given, literally what he has been speaking throughout the Bhagavad Gita is right here in this ladder, in this set of 5 verses, indicating that throughout the Gita, Krishna has only been trying to talk about bhakti, bhakti, bhakti. That's the only thing that is there in his head, and he makes it very explicit in this presentation here, right? So that is one understanding that we need to develop, that how we need to broaden our understanding of what bhakti is, right? And 2, it is also very important, right, to understand that when this spectrum has been given, when Krishna talks about his multiple stages, there is naturally a tendency to develop some kind of a labeling, that number 8, text number 8 is the highest, text number 12 is the lowest, right? But understand that in the spiritual space, there is nothing called highest or lowest, right? In fact, this whole spectrum Krishna talks about, let's take a new page. This is a very important concept for us to understand, right? So in the spiritual spectrum, right, in the spiritual spectrum, there is nothing called as the highest or lowest. From the practitioner's point of view, but rather there is only the most appropriate process. Appropriate process, meaning according to the adhikar, according to the shraddha, according to the qualification of the practitioner, a person will find that particular stage of the spectrum to be the most conducive for one's progress, right? And understanding this is very important, because in our spiritual journey, we always have to keep these 2 things in our mind. What is it? Accept where you are, and at the same time acknowledge where you need to go or where you need to reach, right? So so these are 2 very, very important concepts. So if you look at that in the entire spectrum, first thing is one needs to develop, okay, this is the stage where I'm in, this is where my conviction lies, my spiritual conviction lies at verse number say 11, right? So if you have to accept it, just because there is something called as verse number 8 where one is completely absorbed in Krishna, always thinking about Krishna, very spontaneously serving Krishna, one is blinded in love for Krishna, yes, that definitely is the perfectional stage one has to reach. But if you prematurely start imitating that stage, then you are cheating yourself, and you are also going to disturb your own spiritual practice. So important thing is that we need to develop that kind of self-acceptance, that this is where I stand, this is where my shraddha stands, right? And that is such a grounding feeling, because everyone can operate from the space where they are grounded in. It is called as niyamagraha. Niyamagraha means where one is prematurely trying to imitate someone at a higher stage. So sometimes even when we enter into the spiritual domain, due to peer pressure or sometimes due to our own over enthusiasm, and usually it's due to our own over enthusiasm or because we want to feel good about ourselves, and we want to create an impression to others that, look, I'm also very advanced, right? Because just out of that kind of an egoistic satisfaction, and it may be a very, very subtle thing. Sometimes your intelligence will not even figure out that it is your ego driving your spiritual practice, but we end up imitating things which are beyond our present level of conviction, right? And that is when we many times hurt ourselves, and we many times fall out of this whole spiritual spectrum because we just been burnt out, right? So it is very important that we learn to accept where we are, right? But at the same time, if you only accept where you are and you say that, I'm not going to move out of this place. If I'm at verse number 12, I will remain at verse number 12, right? That is also not the right understanding. Then it becomes shamelessness, meaning that you are not willing to change. You're not willing to improve, right? So if you are only imitating something higher, then you're constantly trying to prove yourself, right? And if you only accept where you are and you're stuck there, then you're not even trying to improve yourself. So this is the balance that we need to find, right? So we accept where we are, and at the same time we need to acknowledge that, look, this is the ideal standard. I don't want to dilute my ideal standard, but I'll work towards that way. I'll make genuine, sincere effort to start heading in that direction, where eventually I'll come to verse number 8. But right now I understand that I'm somewhere at verse number 9 or verse number 10 or wherever, you see. And that is where a great deal of self-honesty, ruthless self-honesty is needed to really assess where we stand, right? And accordingly take up to the practice that has been given. And therefore we have to understand how magnanimous Krishna is. He is not discounting anyone out of the spirituality spectrum, out of the bhakti spectrum, right? That entire all these stages that Krishna has spoken about are all within that realm of devotional spirituality. So we have to, so when we see ourselves, or sometimes when you're dealing with someone else, this is not just for ourselves. Sometimes when we are dealing with others also, we end up being very harsh, right? We have to also provide, if you are in a role of leadership, or if you're in or as a parent, or any kind of a facilitator, it is very important that we facilitate our dependents to develop that kind of self-acceptance as to which stage in that spiritual spectrum that they are in. And at the same time, we also need to create inspiration to let people grow to the acknowledge first and then grow to the higher level, right? So we have to create, and if you try to just merely superimpose your understanding, or even if you try to enforce this is what needs to be done, right, then again you end up burning out people, or breaking down people, right? So this is a very important understanding, where we accept where we are and we acknowledge where we need to go, right? And very, very important, how do I bridge this gap now? How do I bridge this gap between where I am and where I need to go, right? What does it take for me to truly internalize these principles of bhakti and start living them, and and make my progress in this bhakti journey, right? Does it require that I need to read more books? Does it require that I need to start doing some special kind of austerities? Does it require that I need to start chanting some new mantras, right? Now look what Krishna is going to talk about from text number 13, right, till the end of this chapter. What does it take to grow through the spirituality spectrum? Krishna is going to talk about that. And what does it require? Krishna talks about cultivating devotional qualities. Cultivating devotional qualities. Because ultimately, who is a devotee? A devotee is not someone who is adhering to certain external framework or an external textbook definition of things, right? But rather the real textbook definition, so if we may say that, is a devotee is the one who exhibits these devotional qualities, right? And Krishna is going to talk about this whole list of almost around 31, 32 different qualities that a devotee or even an aspiring devotee needs to develop, right? And it's very important, before even we go into the understanding of this devotional qualities, it is very important. Why do we need those? Why do we need to even understand these devotional qualities? It's a very important principle for us to understand. First, right, I'd like to give 3 simple reasons why should one even put some effort to understand. Forget about cultivating, that's the latest. Even to understand what the devotional qualities are, why is it important? The first principle is to relate. Relate with what? To relate with the spiritual teachings, right? Many times when we read, scriptures are not so easy to understand, and even certain philosophical principles. What is dharma? In which situation? What do I need to do? Right? So it is very, very difficult to understand. It is not some kind of a like a SOP, like a standard operating procedure where, okay, in this situation do this, in this situation. So and even some of the principles that the scriptures talk about are very difficult to comprehend. So that's why I'm saying scriptural study is not an academic process, right? For us to even relate with these spiritual teachings, we need to start looking at them through the lens of these devotional qualities. And that's why when you are in the contact of some devotees, great acharyas who have demonstrated these devotional qualities in their life, right? Then by studying the lives of these pure devotees, we will understand, we'll be able to relate with the spiritual teachings, right? So spiritual teachings relate to the spiritual teachings through lives of great devotees, right? So this is very, very important. Otherwise, the scriptures, the Vedas will just remain a very, very theoretical concept to us. We will never be able to genuinely relate and appreciate, oh wow, these things can be put into practice. This is what this principle is talking about. When we see the lives of great devotees, the great acharyas, that's it's so important that we read, we know about the lives of the great devotional acharyas of the past, right? Not just learning scriptures. In fact, their life is scriptures in motion, right? So it is so important for us to know them, just to relate with the spiritual teachings. The second reason is what I like to call as realize. To realize the teachings. Remember when I said scriptures are not just an academic understanding. So many times what happens is, even after knowing many things, we will not be able to practice some things, right? So there's always this gap that remains. When we begin, we are called as a kanishta, right? A beginner. And as you progress, we come to the stage of madhyama and then eventually grow to stage of uttama, a more seasoned practitioner and a very fixed up practitioner. So that gap between a beginner and a more advanced practitioner is their realization of the scripture, of these devotional teachings or the Vedic teachings. And to realize them, that steadiness, right, it does not come through mere action, that is mastering techniques, nor does it come by becoming expert in memorizing the scriptures. So neither action nor knowledge helps you to internalize the teachings, but rather if you really want to realize those teachings, you have to realize it by internalizing the culture, by internalizing the the culture of Gita. And to internalize that culture basically means those values, right? Those qualities that when you start living by those qualities. In the previous scenario, we saw those qualities in the lives of great teachers, and we are able to relate with the teachings. And now, as you start imbibing those qualities in your own life, you will be able to realize these teachings, and that is how you slowly start to bridge that gap between where I am and where I need to go, which we discussed earlier, right? So that gap needs to be bridged by this by adopting these qualities like that. And that is when we can truly understand spirituality beyond even the boundaries that we sometimes create by these external frameworks or traditions or so and so. We will be able to appreciate that how such a devotee that Krishna is talking about may exist in any part of the world, in any tradition, because you are not seeing their external designation or their external practice, but you are seeing their devotional qualities. How are they living their life, right? Therefore, you see, such advanced souls can exist in many traditions, in many places across the world. So truly, that spirituality without denominations, spirituality beyond certain external traditions and frameworks and boundaries, spirituality beyond boundaries is something we'll be able to realize, right? When we will be able to internalize these qualities that Krishna is talking about in this section. And finally, the third reason why I feel understanding this devotional quality is so important, it will also help you to represent. Right? Represent here means, finally, dharma in the society is established by one's own behavior. Right? So represent dharma by one's behavior. Right? So finally, we are, Srila Prabhupada would many times, he would say that people come to our temples because they are attracted to the devotees, to those representatives of Bhagavad Gita. So as students of Bhagavad Gita, we also have to represent the teachings of the Gita. And what does it mean to represent the Bhagavad Gita? Imbibing these qualities to whatever extent we can, right? And start, we should be beacons of these qualities. And that's what it means to be a true student of the Bhagavad Gita, like that. So cultivating, therefore, these devotional qualities that Krishna talks about is so very important, like that. So what exactly are these devotional qualities, right? We'll see them. Of course, we will not go through all of them in detail, but I'll strongly encourage you to please read Srila Prabhupada's purports to these verses from text number 13 to text number 20. Prabhupada very in great detail, he elaborates on all these qualities. Right? We'll very quickly see what these qualities are. He says, Adveshta Sarva Bhutanam, Dveshti, one who does not envy any living entity. Maitri, friendship. Karuna, compassion. Nirmama, free from any kind of proprietary. Nirahankara, without any kind of ego. Sama Dukha Sukha Kshami. This is Sama Dukha Sukha. One who's equipoised in both happiness and distress. Right? Kshami, who's tolerant. Santushta, who's ever satisfied. Santushta Satam Yogi, Yayatma Dhrida Nischaya, who's self-controlled, always engage in devotional service with determination. And Mai Arpita Mano Buddhir, Yomad Bhakta Same Priyaha. Such a devotee whose intelligence is fixed upon me, is a devotee, is very dear to me. Right? So Krishna is now saying, if you want to be dear to me, O Arjuna, or to all the readers of the Bhagavad Gita, these are the qualities that we need to imbibe or at least aspire to develop. Then he says, Yasma no dvijate loko, loka no dvijate chayaha. One who's not put into difficulty and who's not disturbed by anyone else, who's equipoised. Harsha, amarsha, bhaya, udvega. So happiness, distress, fear, anxiety, such a person who remains equipoised, same priyaha. Again, he's very priya. Priya means very dear to me. Then anapeksha, one who's not dependent on other things. Suchi, one who's very pure. Daksha, expert. Udasina, one who's doesn't get anxious unnecessarily, right? One who's free from all pains, and is not over endeavoring for getting certain results. Such a person is yo mad bhakta same priyaha. Such a devotee is very dear to me. Then yona harshati na dveshti, one who neither rejoices nor grieves, who neither laments nor desires, and who and what shubha ashubha parityagi, one who renounces both auspicious and inauspicious things. So here the auspicious and inauspicious are more from a worldly perspective. Papa punya, piety, impiety. One who's not attached to this worldly good and bad. Such a person, because for the sake of Krishna, one transcends even the worldly righteousness and unrighteousness also. Such a devotee is very dear to me. Then one who's equal to friends and enemies. Samaha shatru cha mitrecha. Shatru, enemies, or mitra, friends. One who's equal to such a person, right? Who's equipoised in honor and dishonor, heat and cold, happiness and distress, fame and infamy, who's always free from the contaminating association, right? Mauni, silent. Silent here doesn't mean that he's not talking to people, but he doesn't unnecessarily gossip, right? Satisfied with anything, right? Who doesn't even care for any kind of a fixed residence, right? Who's fixed in his knowledge and is engaged in devotional service. Aniketaha sthiti matir bhaktiman me priyo naraha. Like that. So what our acharyas very beautifully explain is that among all these qualities, right, there is something called as Swarupa Lakshana or Mukhya Lakshana. Swarupa Lakshana. Lakshana means a quality, symptom, or we may use it as a main quality. And there are something called as Tataksha Lakshanas or secondary qualities. Tatashta Lakshanas or secondary qualities. Right? Now, among all of these, that principle Krishna is talking about, Shraddhana mat parama bhaktaste. So the principle of bhakti, yo mad bhakta, becoming a devotee of Krishna, mad bhakta, having the shraddha towards Krishna, right, or being devotionally disposed to Krishna, that is the primary quality. Everything else is a secondary quality. All the other qualities that we spoke about, being equipoised, undisturbed by heat and cold, equal to friends and enemies, always satisfied, peaceful, doesn't care for his residence, doesn't over endeavor in life, blah, 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 blah. All of those are secondary qualities. The primary quality is that one is devotionally disposed to Krishna. In fact, our acharyas also go on to mention that without developing this primary quality, one cannot truly develop the secondary qualities, right? So that is why that we devotionally disposed, that bhakti, the principle of bhakti that Krishna, this whole chapter is focusing on, is such an important principle, right? When one is disposed that way, then gradually one naturally develops these qualities. At one level, yes, we also work hard to develop these qualities, and also by the Lord's grace, these qualities also they are dawned upon us. They dawn within us like that. So that way, but the important principle that we understand is that we truly need to understand this spectrum of spirituality and broaden our perspective of what does it really mean to be a devotee of Krishna. And that's what this whole chapter is talking about. I'll very quickly summarize what we discussed today, and then we can take up any questions or comments we have. So we began this chapter with Arjuna's important question, which he took up from having seen the entire, having analyzed from 7th to 11th chapter. Arjuna basically understood that there are two ways of approaching Krishna. There is the direct form of Krishna by direct devotion to Krishna, to his personal form, or there is this approaching him in his impersonal, unmanifested form, either as Brahman or as a universal form or as a time factor, right? So Arjuna asks, which is better? So Krishna very emphatically he states that approaching my personal form is the most perfect because I am the swift deliverer of such people. On the other hand, it is not that the other process is wrong. It is just that at last they will achieve me because such a troublesome, very difficult process, right? And then in that connection, Krishna presents this whole spirituality spectrum where he says that, ideally one should always fix one's mind about Krishna, that process of Ananya Bhakti. But if one cannot do that, follow the regulative principles of sadhana bhakti. If one cannot do that, at least work for Krishna. If one cannot even do that, at least work at some level of selflessness. Don't be so self-centric. Don't be so selfish. Because that selfishness is what that brought us into this material consciousness. So at least work with some kind of selflessness, work in a dispassionate mode, giving up the results of your work. But if you cannot even do that, at least try to develop some kind of a mindful living, some kind of a meditative mindful living. If you cannot even do that, then at least try to be some kind of a seeker of self-awareness, right? Of some kind of a seeker of spirituality, right? So that jnana, dhyana, nishkama, working in devotion, sadhana, and ananya bhakti. So this entire spirituality spectrum Krishna presents, and he includes all of them. Within all these people are directly or indirectly trying to connect Krishna. And in this connection, we also saw the very important principle that how we need to accept where we are and also acknowledge where we need to go. Because it is not that there is the highest or lowest path, there is only the most appropriate path, which is exactly suited for us. So according to where we stand, we need to accept where we are and acknowledge where we need to go. But how do I bridge that gap? That gap is bridged not by knowledge, not by mastering some techniques, not by doing austerities, but by developing those devotional qualities. And that's what Krishna lists. And we saw those three levels. Why do we need to develop this or even understand his devotional qualities? First, to relate with the spiritual teachings. Second, to realize and internalize them in our own life. And to represent them, because ultimately dharma is established by our own behavior. So with these three reasons, we need to understand his devotional qualities. And we saw the whole list of those devotional qualities, which I encourage you to read in more detail from Srila Prabhupada's purport. But broadly speaking, these devotional qualities can be categorized into two. There is a Swarupa Lakshana, Mukhya Lakshana, right, which is the primary quality, the main quality, which is to be devotionally disposed to Krishna, devotionally inclined towards Krishna. Second, the Tataksha Lakshana, the secondary quality, all the other qualities that we spoke about. And it is important that when the primary quality is there, the secondary qualities become very easy for us to imbibe in our own life, like that. So with this, Krishna ends the understanding of what Bhakti Yoga is. And in the next chapter, Arjuna is going to ask some very interesting questions on some technical understandings of the workings of material nature. And that whole section is again called as the Jnana section of the Bhagavad Gita, which we'll elaborate in our next class. All right. So very quickly, let's take some quick questions or comments if anybody has any. All right. If anybody would like to unmute themselves, like I said, this is one of the smallest chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, only 20 verses, right? But at the same time, we understand this is a very, very deep chapter, because this is the whole practice part is there. Because if you remember, we discussed in chapter number 10, we discussed about the Sambandha, Abhidheya and Prayojana aspect. That ultimate, that Prayojan, the perfection of our devotional practice, it comes when we start imbibing these devotional qualities that Krishna spoke. So it's in a sense, it may be easy to to hear this chapter, but very difficult to start applying this chapter. All right, we have a question. Alokji, would you like to ask a question?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dhanvar Pradam.
Right. Dhanvat
So
Prabhu.
what are these secondary qualities examples? Can you little elaborate the last you described?
Yeah, so all these qualities that we read, like being non-envious, being kind to everyone, all the list of qualities that Krishna gave, right? So they are all, except for that one aspect of being devotionally inclined towards Krishna, all the qualities, they come as secondary qualities. So the whole list of 31 qualities that we read from text number 13 to 20, except for that one of being devotionally disposed, everything else is secondary. When I use the word secondary, doesn't mean they are useless. They are also important, but developing the primary quality will lead to development of the secondary qualities, like that. Okay. All right. Okay, we have, yes, Gail, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Prabhu. Yes. The primary characteristic is, when you say to become devotionally inclined, means to just be favorably inclined toward Krishna, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Then my main question is for this this text 12.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a famously troublesome verse, but I would just like to really get the hierarchy that Krishna is trying to explain here a little better. How would you, the various items in this verse of cultivation of knowledge, meditation, renunciation of the fruits of action, as in terms of hierarchy 1, 2, and 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is best, second best, third best according to Krishna here?
Right. So Krishna, in this verse, text number 12, Krishna goes in the reverse order. So if you see the translation, Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasat. So if you cannot take to this practice, then engage yourself in cultivation of knowledge. However,
yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can I stop you with, okay, if you cannot take to this practice refers to what exactly?
So what the sequence of events, that sequence of practices that have been mentioned so far from text number 8 to 11. So in the flow of thought that we have been going along, maybe if I may project our notes here, right? So if you look at this sequence here, so we went into text number 8, where one is following exclusive devotion. Text number 9, one is following sadhana bhakti. Then text number 10, where one is working in devotion. Text number 11, one is working in a mood where one is giving up the results of one's work. But if you cannot take up to that, then Krishna says, then engage yourself in cultivation of knowledge. However, better than this knowledge is meditation. And better than meditation is, again, he talks about renunciation of fruits of your work.
Okay, wait now. So first, this practice refers to verses 8 to 11.
Yeah, or you may specifically take text number 11.
11, giving up the results of your work.
Yes.
Okay, and then if you cannot give up the results of your work, then engage yourself in cultivation of knowledge means get understanding of what it means to be Atma.
Exactly. So specifically, this is how Vishnu Thakur interprets this. So I didn't go into the technicalities just to not to confuse a new reader about this, but actually even our Acharya, like Vishnu Thakur and Baldev Devbhushan, have interpreted this verse in different ways, right? So yes, so here specifically our Acharyas, they mentioned here that knowledge is just the knowledge of self-realization, that I am not this body, I am the soul, right? So do that, right? But then But better than that knowledge, better than that theoretical knowledge that I am not this body, I am the soul, is actually dhyan. Because dhyan is literally that knowledge put into practice. Right?
Uh-huh.
And
yeah, where you okay, this dhyan, this meditation, right?
yes,
You are meditating on super soul?
not necessarily on super soul. On it could be any kind of where you're trying to calm your mind and disconnect your consciousness from matter. That is what this kind of dhyan is. The moment you do meditation on super soul, it becomes a devotional practice. But here this dhyan is basically what a typical Ashtanga yogi does, where one is trying to involute one's consciousness, or should I say withdraw one's consciousness from matter to the soul. Right? Like, for example, right now I may be so absorbed in the things, my possessions in my life. So if I disconnect from that outermost layer of my life and come little inwards to my own body, that is a big progress. And from bodily consciousness, if I become turn little more inwards to my own prana, to my own feelings and emotions, that is another level progress. From there, if I go to my mind, and from mind, if I go to my intelligence, from my intelligence, I go to my sense of being. So this is how a yogi slowly starts disconnecting one's consciousness from the external layers and starts to go inwards. So typically that is what the dhyana that we talk about. And for that dhyan to happen, I need to fix my consciousness on some anchor. For some people, it is the breath. For some people, it could be just one particular thought. It's called as an alambana, pratyaya alambana. For some people, it could just be maybe just they're staring at a dot on the wall and they're just trying to focus their attention. Whenever the mind is wandering, they just try to just bring it back to that one particular object of dhyana, like that. So that is it need not be directly having some kind of a devotional object of meditation, not as Paramatma as you mentioned, but it could be any kind of. That's why I use the word mindfulness, which need not be devotional directly, externally need not be theistic. Maybe let me use the word that way. It need not be a theistic mindfulness at this stage.
Okay, and then better than trying to withdraw your mind from the things external to the soul, right? Is better than that is to give up the fruits of action, which seems to take us back to number 11, right?
Right, exactly. So that's how it fits into the whole structure, the hierarchy there.
Okay, and the reason that this renunciation of fruits is better than the dhyana is because that this is the first item that has a devotional inspiration or attitude?
Because you see, finally, the Gita philosophy is not the process of disengagement, but rather right engagement. At the stage of jnana and dhyana, one is still kind of disconnected from this world. But this is the stage where one is coming back to the process of, remember in chapter number 2, we spoke about detached disengagement and attached engagement, and the Buddhi Yoga being detached engagement process. So Krishna is finally wanting the entire Gita philosophy is a very socially engaging spirituality. It is not a socially isolating spirituality. The entire bhakti itself is a very socially engaging spirituality, right? But at the stage of dhyan and gyan, one may seem like one is socially disconnected from this world. So to bring it back on track, this process. So the hierarchy, so to speak, here is more in terms of how one is still engaged with this world and having their mind relatively peaceful and undisturbed, like that. So that is why, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in this renunciation of the fruits of action, that seems to be you're disengaging from this world.
No, you're without acting, how will you generate results? It is not giving up your work, it is giving up the results of your work. Right?
But is it devotional at all?
Yes, according to Krishna. That is what I was pointing out earlier. So sometimes you will meet in this world some people who are very passionate about humanitarian causes, even for ecological causes or animal welfare, etc. Right? And they really dedicate their life in a very dispassionate way. They're dedicating. They may not have a direct connection to any kind of a theistic understanding or Krishna understanding, but they work with a very high level of dispassion in their own respective field. Such person is Krishna is including even such people in this spirituality spectrum. So we have to appreciate such people. In fact, such people will take up to spirituality much easier because they already have developed certain level of dispassion in their system, in their consciousness.
Yeah, so but dispassion doesn't seem to be synonymous with devotion, though.
Yes, it is not. It is not. Yes, but it is that. So that is this. That is where the spectrum which is given is. This is the stage where the person is, and they will gradually need to rise up to the next level. That's the acknowledging where they need to go part. Right?
Okay, and then by such dispassion, which we are, again, we're saying that renunciation of fruits mentioned there is the same as text 11, right? That's for sure.
Yes.
Okay, and so this, so the idea is that you don't do work for your own sense gratification. You do for the sake of others.
That also is a great progress, right?
Yes, because that's like that sets you in the right direction for eventually doing for Krishna. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so now when he says, by such renunciation, one can attain peace of mind. And can you just elaborate on that? Why does such renunciation foster peace of mind?
Right, because while dealing in this world, our why those disturbances they come in the first place is because of our own attachments, right? So at least developing that, so coming to that state of being peaceful at a mental level is the fertile ground on which devotion can be built up. Right? If you remember in the second chapter also, when Krishna talks about how for one who is resolute in purpose, Vyavasayatmika buddhi ekeha kurunandana. For one who is resolute in purpose, this strong devotional practice immediately manifests. But for someone who is multi-branched, their devotion they'll not be able to be fixed in their devotional practice. So at least they are in a more calm, equipoised, equanimous state. And from that state, they can very easily build the requirement for the next stage. So while living in this world, it is very important that one experiences that sense of calmness in their state of being. That is a fertile ground for spirituality to develop within us.
Yeah, because attachment means anxiety, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Attachment basically means you are adding more fuel to your ego. right? Because all our attachments are born out of certain identities that we carry. I am a lover of good food. Therefore, I am attached to, I'm always craving, I'm always gluttonous for some food, right? That is attachment that I carry. If I carry an identity that, look, I am a, I love, say for example, being irresponsible or whatever. I like my own freedom, or I like to just take care of my own well-being, right? So then our attachment to being irresponsible, our attachment to not being disciplined, that comes out of that. So all our attachments, all our so quote unquote anarthas are actually born out of a certain false identity that we carry about ourselves, like that.
Okay, Prabhu. Yeah, and just to repeat one more time that meditation is better than better than knowledge.
Yeah.
Is
better than knowledge is, however, meditation, and better than meditation is renunciation of the fruits of action, like that.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's not that clear to me why, since meditation is practically, in a practical way, getting a person to focus more on their real self, which is Atma, why renunciation is better than that.
Yeah, because if you, again, as I mentioned earlier, the idea of Bhagavad Gita is, because real detachment, it only develops through right spiritual attachment. At that stage where one is just focusing on Atman, one is disconnecting from this world, but one has not developed that right connection to transcendence. And for that connection to transcendence, we need a positive engagement. Right? Does it make sense? Staying away from bad food is not going to make me healthy. I also need to eat good food. But for someone who's only eating bad food all the time, at least telling them stop eating bad food is a progress. But then after that, they need to come back to the line of positive engagement. So text number 11 to 8 or 8 to 11 are all talking about positive engagement. So that way, so in terms of the true spiritual understanding, that how real detachment is in spiritual attachment, a concept we spoke earlier also, in the spirit of that, the just merely focusing on oneself and disconnecting from the world, that is not spirituality. You need to then transcend even that. And that is why Prabhupada many times in his purport, he would say that devotion starts beyond liberation.
Yeah.
Right? So when we see that such a person attains a peace of mind means what? Such a person is liberated from the miseries of this world, from the disturbances of this world, from the disturbances the gunas are creating in their head.
Caused by attachment.
Caused by attachment, in short. Exactly. Like that, one is liberated from one's attachments.
Yeah, I think the key thing that you mentioned was the fact that the renunciation is just of the fruits, is not of the action. Therefore, you are still engaging in the world. You're just not engaging in a selfish way.
Exactly. Yeah. We are trying to get over that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you.
That was
Hare
beautiful.
Krishna. All
Hare
right.
Krishna.
Let's take another question. Arvindji, would you like to ask your question?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. That spirituality spectrum is very beautifully you mentioned the whole process. Thank you very much for that. And I want to know about the prescribed duty. There is one, I think, 10th verse. So I want to know, how should we know our prescribed duty as what is our dharma, like
Right,
what is
right,
our psychophysical nature.
right.
So
So
how
yes,
should we know it?
good. Very good question. Actually, if you remember, we discussed this in our third chapter. I don't know if you followed our third chapter section, but or if you aren't, you can access our recordings. We spoke about how basically the Gita philosophy or the Vedic philosophy basically talks about these four different kinds of combination of gunas, right? And based on the combination of the gunas, we spoke about these four varnas. This is a concept that we will elaborate again in the 18th chapter. Krishna is going to talk about the four characteristics of these four varnas, or what is the psychophysical disposition of these four varnas. Krishna will elaborate again the 18th chapter. But I will encourage you to go back and listen to the recordings of our third chapter, where this prescribed duties, how our inclinations, and what are also the cravings that each of those psychophysical dispositions create, right? So basically, very good understanding of my swadharma or the prescribed duty. We discussed that. So I'll encourage you to have a look at the third chapter recording once. Okay. We have another question in the chat box. I will take that, and then I'll ask Suresh ji to ask his question. So the question is, sometimes we read in Prabhupada's purports that how this kind of an impersonal worship is like spiritual suicide. So, but then here it seems like impersonal worship has been permitted, right? So Krishna is saying that, at last they achieve me. So how do we understand, how do we reconcile this very, very strong statement of Prabhupada versus what Krishna is speaking here? So within this impersonal worship, so there is, broadly you can say, there are, though we spoke about impersonalism as Brahman, as the universal form, as a time, they are all the legitimate impersonal worships. The impersonal worship that Prabhupada condemns is called as Mayavada. Mayavada is different from Brahmavada. A Brahmavadi, or this kind of a bona fide impersonal worshipper, acknowledges that the Lord has a form, but is personally attached to the Lord's impersonal form. And therefore, one tries to approach the Lord in that way. Whereas a Mayavadi, on the other hand, condemns the form of the Lord, says the Lord's form is also Maya. He doesn't have a form. He doesn't have a physical, personal form. He is only impersonal. That kind of an understanding is a spiritual suicide. It's a complete philosophical deviation, and such kind of practice is spiritual suicide. So that is the understanding here. So otherwise, Brahmavad is very much a bona fide methodology. In fact, later on the Gita also, we're going to talk about that in the 18th chapter. We're going to talk about that as the, when Krishna talks about the confidential, more confidential, the most confidential spirituality, where he's going to summarize some of these concepts again. So there we'll talk about that once again. Hope that answers your question. Sureshji, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Dandvat Pranam, Prabhuji, for the wonderful class, and especially so about the, you simplified the aspects of bhakti wonderfully. And my question is, like as you said, there are different platforms of bhakti. Like one of them is when you don't expect the results of your work which you are doing. Now, I have a small question on that, Prabhuji, because I have heard this statement quite a number of times, but I always wonder like how to implement this. And it looks so simple, if you see the statement, it looks very simple, that don't expect the results of your work, but it is very difficult to implement it for simple reason, because I don't know how to implement it. Like say, for example, now I have my own business. Now, when I work in my business, I get a lot of results. And definitely they become the motivational point for me to grow more and more and more. And if I don't expect those results, like how am I going to, really take forward my company in terms of sales, in terms of profits?
Right,
so that will be the limiting factor for me, Prabhuji. So if you can just throw some light on this, I'll be very much thankful to you, Prabhuji.
Yeah. Very nice. Actually, we touched upon this topic in the second chapter itself, right? When Krishna talks about this karmanyavadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, you have a right to perform your duty, but you don't have a right to enjoy the results of your activities. So usually what happens is we become very, very obsessed with a certain way of results, right? If you remember in that class, I also spoke about how actually it is our attachments which weigh us down. When we use the word dispassion, dispassion is not lack of passion, but it is distraction-free passion. So if you as a business person wants to focus on success in your business, right, then focus just purely on getting that success. Don't get distracted with, oh, when these results come, then I'm going to buy a new bungalow, and I'm going to buy some new property, etc., etc., right? So then what happens? Your motivation for business is not purely doing good in your business, right, and benefiting so many. Naturally, when you do good business, your family is going to get benefited, your employees are going to get benefited, then the nation's GDP is going to increase. There's so many such benefits that will come. So rather than focusing on that selfless aspect of your business, if you're focusing more on what I will potentially enjoy, what I'll potentially selfishly enjoy, when you focus on that kind of a selfish enjoyment, that is the attachment that we're talking about. Those are the cravings, right? So when you are focusing your nature of being a business person and you're using your skills so fantastically in gaining profits, that is good. But those profits or whatever, it needs to have some kind of a higher connect, some kind of a selfless purpose, right? So then, so when we are talking about working without attachment to the results, it means don't let the results overwhelm you, right? Otherwise, I'll tell you what happens. If tomorrow, when there is failure in your business, you will be demotivated, right? Because what has been driving you so far, what has been the fuel for your enthusiasm, is not the work itself, but the prospect that I'm going to enjoy the result. So actually, if you see, this mode of being free from results is such an empowering state. Then success or failure, you will be so focused, you will give your 110% for your work. Now tell me, which state is better? Being attached to your results or being not letting the results overwhelm you? Which state is better?
Yeah, I think second one will be the better one, because definitely in that case my motivational will always be in the top gear, like whatever happens.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. That
basically, yeah. So basically, like it's a kind of attachments which we have with the results, and actually telling you very frankly, why we have those attachments, I wouldn't know. I would have only one reason, but I have got 10 more reasons to get dissatisfied with those when they don't get fulfilled.
Yes, exactly. Right. So that is why whenever I use the word dispassion, I'm very careful to keep defining it again and again. It is not lack of passion. It is just distraction-free passion. Right. Passion is important, but when does passion become important? When it is connected to some kind of a selfless purpose or a purpose beyond you. Let me just put it that way. A purpose beyond you. Then it becomes a very important trait like that.
Okay, thank you very much, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. All right. Yeah. And so there was a question asking that are Brahmavadis also aware that the absolute truth has a personal form, even though they are aspiring for the impersonal aspect? Yes, of course. They are aware of the personal form. It's just that personally they are attached to the impersonal form. You hear the contradiction in the sentence. They have a personal attachment to the impersonal, like that. Yes. But they do acknowledge, and that's what differentiates the impersonal, the Brahmavadis from the Mayavadis, like that. Of course, if you look at it again, even more deeper from the pure bhakti perspective, the soul ultimately gets its full nourishment in that personal service to the Lord. And that personal service is not possible to the impersonal Brahman. And that is why sometimes we hear, descriptions given that if the joy of impersonal Brahman is like is like the water contained in the hoof print of a calf, or say one drop of water, then the joy that is there in the personal worship is like an ocean, because the soul really experiences its full potential to love and experience love in that kind of a personal relationship with Krishna. So therefore our Bhakti Acharyas, even though this Brahmavad is bona fide, our Bhakti Acharyas still, they're not they are not very inclined to glorify that or keep that in a very high pedestal like that, right? And definitely Mayavad is like absolutely condemned, but even the Brahmavad also sometimes they keep it away, they push it aside, saying we are not interested even in that. So that's what sometimes you'll also see in our Acharyas writings like that. All right, so that brings us to the end of today's discussion. So let's end our discussion with the closing mantras. Joining your palms together. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunattu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you all very much. So see you in tomorrow's session, where we will now enter into the last phase of the Bhagavad Gita, chapters 13 to 18, which are called as a Jnana section. And I'll explain why that section is called as a Jnana in our tomorrow's discussion. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.